Alrighty, so welcome again, everybody, and we'll continue to let folks in. We do have a lot of material today, so we do want to get started. And so as I indicated, Kelly and John will be assisting in today's training, but we did want to focus in on a quick recap of yesterday. So yesterday, again, we threw a lot at you folks. We covered the who, what, when, where, and why of CREP. So hopefully you folks have a little bit better foundational understanding of what this effort is all about. We provided an overview of what participants and what land is eligible, what we're looking for in terms of eligibilities. John provided a recap of some of the marketing and promotion efforts so far, as well as kind of charged you folks to cooperate and continue to do marketing and promotion moving forward. And again, that's going to take a lot of coordination. We're going to provide a lot of tools for you folks to do that. John also covered the state of Michigan's registration process, which is going to be a component of participants to receive the state benefits. Kelly went into great detail on the CREP sign-up offer process. We covered FSA's role, NRCS's role, and consequently, a lot of you folks will be assisting with those roles beyond the promotion, the marketing, and the various field work opportunities. Kelly demonstrated some assistive tools and documents that have been developed to try to define CREP versus many of the other CRP components. And we covered a lot of the other voluntary conservation programs that are available. And again, as conservationists, at the end of the day, we want to glean as much conservation on the ground that we can through this effort beyond even CREP. So again, that was what we covered yesterday. And again, we acknowledge we threw a lot at you folks. But today, the journey continues. And so today, we want to get into John's going to start off with an environmental benefits discussion, which I think fits into this concept of voluntary adoption of conservation, again, beyond CREP. And so he's going to spend a little bit of time covering some of the environmental benefits of CREP and beyond. Then we're going to focus in on the CREP practices. And then we're going to look at some of the maintenance and management activities or some other requirements. So once we have a contract and we help folks establish these practices, these conservation covers, we want to help them through the life of the contract to maintain and manage those acres. And that's where, again, a lot of the technicians out there, you folks are going to be critical to help those folks maintain those footprints once established. And then we're going to get into the incentives, the financial end of this, which is going to be important, right? How are we going to market and promote this? How is it going to make sense from a business standpoint to landowners and farmers? And then we're going to talk about some other CREP policy specifics and then some next steps. Again, this is just really the beginning of our journey. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to John to get into some of the environmental benefits of this effort and beyond. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Dale. And I'm going to turn off my camera here so folks can focus on these slides. So we'll do a little Conservation 101 here, talk about the environmental benefits of in general, and as well as some of these CREP practices. But as Dale mentioned, first and foremost, we mentioned this yesterday, CREP is a completely voluntary program, and there's a lot of advantages to that approach that we'll get into here in just a minute. So again, kind of a quick overview of farm nutrient pollution runoff. As I'm sure many of you are aware, farmers apply nutrients to their fields in several forms, chemical fertilizers as well as animal manure. And those nutrients provide crops with nitrogen, phosphorus necessary to grow and produce the food that we eat. But when nitrogen and phosphorus are not fully utilized by those growing plants, they can be lost from farm fields that negatively impact water quality downstream, even some air quality issues. And that happens in a variety of ways. That excess nitrogen and phosphorus can be washed from farm fields during rain events, when snowmelt occurs. It also can leach down through the soil profile and get into groundwater over time. High levels of nitrogen and phosphorus can cause the eutrophication of water bodies, and this can lead to hypoxia or dead zones that cause fish kills and decrease aquatic life. It can also, excess nutrients can also cause harmful algae blooms in freshwater systems. We've seen that over recent years, especially down in Western Lake Erie Basin and even sometimes up in Saginaw Bay. And, this isn't only unsightly, but it causes issues with wildlife. It can cause human health concerns with toxic algae blooms forming, impacting drinking water. Again, we saw that in the city of Toledo a few years back. So it's important to keep these nutrients on the field and available for crops. If we go to the next slide. So how do you do that? There's several different approaches that farmers can use to reduce nutrient losses on their fields, on their operations. One current example is conservation drainage practices, and this is the form of using subsurface tile drainage to manage the amount of water that is coming into a field, that's moving off of a field, moving through that soil profile. And it's a very common practice here in the Midwest, Michigan, especially in these CREP watersheds, Western Lake Erie Basin and Saginaw Bay, especially very heavily tiled fields. That drainage water can carry soluble forms of both nitrogen and phosphorus. And so the idea, again, is to kind of reduce that nutrient load while maintaining adequate drainage for crop production, seedbed preparation, harvest, all those things. Drainage plays an important role. And so the conservation drainage kind of takes the concept of maybe being a little bit more proactive or intentional about your drainage system, the design, how it operates. And then there's also this kind of a new and emerging technologies that you would tack on some bioreactors or saturated buffers or other modifications to the drainage system that can maybe capture or filter out some of these nutrients as that water moves through the soil profile into the drainage pipe and out the end. So that's one common practice. Some other common practices, if you want to advance and ensure year-round ground cover. So we see this currently. A lot of folks have taken a renewed interest in planting cover crops, but also perennial species, getting grass cover on the ground year-round. And the idea here is, water has a lot of energy. Raindrops have a lot of energy, and usually what we see is these nutrients bind to soil particles, and if the soil's moving, the nutrients are moving with them. So getting cover crops, getting perennial grasses on the ground helps to make sure that soil stays in place, those nutrients stay in place, and they're not being washed in these big rain events or snow melts. And then field buffers is another common practice. Again, getting something other than bare ground adjacent to fields, whether it's trees, shrubs, grasses, and especially if those fields are adjacent to surface waters, these buffers can do a couple things: help reduce the amount of bare soil that's available to move adjacent to that stream or that body of water, but then also act as a filter for the neighboring field that might have some of that soil and some of those nutrients moving off of it during these events, and preventing that from going off the field and reaching the body of water. If you want to advance to the next slide. Additionally, managing livestock access to streams. And a lot of people think that the manure is the issue with livestock crossing streams or accessing streams, but it's actually the sediment. They're big animals, and they do a lot of damage to the stream banks. And again, that soil moves, gets into the water, gets washed away. So things like limiting access by installing fences along those streams, having controlled access, engineered crossings that help stabilize the stream bank and prevent those banks and the soil being compromised and getting into the water. And then also just kind of general engagement in some of the larger watershed-wide activities that are going on within a farmer's area. We have some very active farmer groups, both in Western Lake Erie Basin, as well as Saginaw Bay. I'm sure we do over in Lake Macatawa as well. And the concept here is that you get a large, a bunch of stakeholders and landowners and people interested involved in kind of trying to address some of the issues from a broader scale rather than, just looking at it from a field by field perspective or just your own property perspective. And, we've seen farmers take a very active role in these groups, leadership roles, where they're not only kind of demonstrating the practices that they're implementing on their farms in an effort to encourage their neighbors to do the same thing, but also, kind of encouraging folks to make some changes, make some improvements, and address water quality. Again, we've seen this happen a lot in Western Lake Erie Basin through some partner support. Our conservation district partners have led some of these efforts, and we also have a pretty broad stakeholder partnership effort in Saginaw Bay right now to try to encourage these farmer-led watershed groups to be proactive in managing water quality issues. So, and those are just kind of a few of the options available out there for farmers to try to address nutrient losses on their fields. If you go to the next slide, please. And again, I don't think we can stress this enough. Voluntary conservation is a part of the solution, something that I'm a firm believer in. And, I'll admit up front, it does take longer. Regulation is certainly a method that, you get with a program or you get in trouble. But, I'd argue that if you take the time to educate the landowner, if they understand that there's an issue, they generally want to do something about it. And once they understand the issue and understand the solutions and identify a system that works for them, they're going to adopt it and they're going to stick with it. Whereas regulation, they'll do what they have to do to meet the bare minimum, and generally not going to go much above that. And if those regulations change, if they get lessened, they're probably going to go back to the old way of doing things. So I'm a firm believer in voluntary conservation. I think we all are. It's kind of how we operate, and glad that CREP is part of that approach and another tool in the toolbox for our partners to utilize. So I guess with that, I'll pass it off to Dale to talk a little bit more about some of these practices specific to CREP.
All right, thanks, John. Appreciate that primer. I think it's a good reminder, again, that we're excited about CREP, but obviously CREP is just one of the tools in the toolbox, but we have so many other tools. Cover crops, there's been a huge investment and push in that over the last couple of years for obvious reasons. But even that is kind of an old concept, right? That's nothing new. That's been around for a long time. But how do we convince landowners and farmers to adopt that? Beyond these conservation efforts, I wanted to share the risk management agency that handles crop insurance. They recently provided a $5 an acre premium subsidy for anybody that would certify or report their fields that had a cover crop established on those. I believe that had to have been certified within FSA at the local service center level by March 15th. So you can see that there's wider benefits being or incentives being provided to encourage people to adopt simple things like cover crops. And so again, along comes CREP, and this is our focus today, but we thought that was a good primer, and I always enjoy listening to John because he is a true conservationist, as everybody on this call is. And so it's up to us to get folks looking at these and voluntarily adopting these practices and any other practices and through our other efforts so that we can avoid regulation like some states like Minnesota who require buffers at the landowner's expense. So this is part of our effort to avoid that, quite honestly. So as Kelly shared with you folks yesterday, when we looked at the appointment workbook, that matrix, which is a wonderful tool that covers all aspects of CRP, including CREP, if you looked at that closely, or when you do, you'll see that there is actually 43 different conservation practices available under CRP generically. With CREP, we're going to focus on 8 of those. And as we mentioned yesterday, when you folks are promoting this, you may find some individuals that they need to adopt one of those continuous practices, or they may want to look at grassland CRP, or maybe the next general sign up is attractive. We want to try to capture all that as we can. We're going to be true to CREP, but we have to realize that there's other programs and opportunities. Again, those would be separate contracts. but we want to try to facilitate and capture that interest in conservation, as you folks have those conversations. So again, CREP focuses on 8 specific practices, and those are on the screen, and we want to go into some detail on that today with you folks. And then again, as we mentioned, Kelly's going to get into the financials behind this, which we think are very attractive. One thing we need to talk about, we mentioned this yesterday, that in our agreement currently, there was verbiage that indicated that at any given time, we could not have over a certain amount of cumulative acres under the CP1, the CP2, and then the 23, 23A, and 26 combined. And again, we'll make it clear what those acronyms mean as we move forward. But the point is, you can see where we currently are at. And so with those specific practices, we have a balance in a couple of those cases, less than 2,000 acres that we're going to have to live within. We mentioned an environmental assessment that's being completed. We'll talk about that at the end of today's session, and we'll kind of relate this back. But we want you folks to understand up front with these specific practices out of the 8, and this is 5 of our 8, we're going to have maybe some limitations out of the gate on what we can enroll. But that is something we're hopeful and confident that we can address in the EA to alleviate that and then to expand our efforts there. I will say too now is we're going to have some breaks in the conversation today for questions. Kelly's going to be monitoring the chat, and so we want to try to address those as they come up. But again, you'll have opportunity if you want to ask those direct as we come to those breaks.
So Dale, I have a question already about these totals are for the whole state and not per county, correct?
For the whole, yeah, for the whole watershed, or for the 3 watersheds combined under CREP, those are our limitations, correct?
So another one, our livestock practices available through CREP. We're going to be getting to that, Gibbs. So if you would just hold off until we get through the practices, you'll know what those are. So with that, Dale, I'll let you get back to rolling.
All right, thanks, Kelly. Thanks, folks. So the first practice is what we refer to as a CP1, and as it says here, it's an establishment of permanent introduced grasses and legumes. And again, it's used to reduce soil erosion and sedimentation, improve water quality, and then to create or enhance wildlife habitat. So under the Michigan CREP agreement, this practice is being implemented as a super buffer. Wider grass filter strips are planted strategically on acres between fields and surface water, rivers, streams, lakes, and drainage ditches, etc., to protect water quality. So that's the kind of the why this is an important component of our CREP. I should say up front too, some of you that were familiar with our CREP initially prior to this unsuspension, we used to have a 30-70 requirement with both the CP1 and the CP2. That is not something we're authorized to move forward. So if somebody selects a CP1, it's going to be entirely made up of introduced grasses and legumes. And so that's important for those that remember how we went about this the last go around. So further practice requirements for the CREP CP1, the acreage must have an erodibility index of 8 or greater. In a few moments, Kelly's going to talk about how FSA is going to determine that before these are referred to NRCS or a technical service provider for needs and feasibility. So FSA is going to determine that up front, that the acreage being offered meets that erodibility index. And then the cropland must be immediately adjacent to an eligible water body as determined by USDA and not exceed a maximum average width of 1,000 feet from the edge of the eligible water body, unless documented according to the field office tech guide. So in certain cases, based on certain slopes, certain soils, if it's documented that we need to go wider than that maximum average. The word average is important as well, right? Because farmers like to square up these types of practices. They're more practical for them to farm around, more practical to establish, quite honestly, and maintain. So that's another selling point, is that these are averages. And the CP1 CREP practice, any acreage that meets the EI of 8 or greater and is, not more than 1,000 foot maximum average, It's going to be comprised of at least 3 species of introduced grasses and legumes. And then in that mix, we want to add at least 2 forb or legume species best suited for wildlife in the area. So that's the minimum mix that we're requiring. We're not making up specific mixes. We're going to rely upon the planner to look at the soils, stay within this formula in their recommendations. So that's the CP1. The CREP CP2, essentially the same practice. The difference is the CP2 is made up of permanent native grasses. So the CP1 is introduced grasses and legumes. The CP2 is native grasses. So again, permanent native grasses, they're used to reduce soil erosion and sedimentation, improve water quality, and create or enhance wildlife habitat, just like the CP1. But I think our wildlife folks realize and would advocate native grasses have more benefit to wildlife than introduced typically. Under the Michigan CREP agreement, this practice again is being implemented as a super buffer. So wider grass filter strips again are planted strategically on acres between fields and surface waters. Again, we're looking at surface waters as rivers, streams, lakes, and drainage ditches, again, to protect water quality. Just like the CP1 FSA, we're going to work with the landowner or the farmer who's offering the acres to make sure that the erodibility index of 8 or greater is demonstrated. That's wind or water, not both combined. So that, again, is another change from how we operated last go around. And just like the CP1, the CREP CP2, it must be immediately adjacent to an eligible water body. We cannot exceed that maximum average width of 1,000 feet from the edge of the eligible water body unless NRCS or the technical service provider can document a wider need. And this is going to be comprised of at least 3 native grasses and 6 forb wildlife species. And as we look at those wildlife species, again, we're not coming up with specific mixes. We want to be able to make this economical, not only for the participants, but also for the state of Michigan and the federal government and our cost shares. But we also want to make sure that we have at least 2 species that their primary onset of blooming during each period of early, mid, and late season from approximately March through October. And then in addition to the 9 species of grasses and forbs, an additional native shrub beneficial to local wildlife may be included in the conservation cover. So some folks are hesitant to put a shrub in. You folks know that in Michigan, you idle a farm field. Typically, we do get woody encroachment. And that's part of the maintenance that we'll talk about later. But that is an option if folks want to put some native shrubs on the CP2 CREP, that is an option. So with that, Kelly, I might turn it over to you to kind of explain the EI of 8 and how we're going to document that.
All right, thanks, Dale. So we did have a couple of questions in the chat as well, Dale, and one was, would vernal pools be covered under CP1? And just for everybody to understand what these CP1s and 2s are, and the other one says based on the wider filter strip, these aren't whole fields, and that's correct too. These are large filter strips. So think 1,000-foot filter strip that also has to be on ground that is highly erodible, has to have an EI of 8 or greater. FSA, when somebody's interested in enrolling one of these, you're going to have to create a terrace scenario for each field to run to calculate that EI. So it's going to be on a per field basis. Once you run that terrace scenario and you have that, because we got to keep those, that's going to be your documentation that you keep in the CRP folder to prove that. You can actually go back and edit your terrace scenario. And if they're doing other practices on that track that they're submitting as an offer, then you can go back and add your other practices and submit that to NRCS. If you would go to the next slide, Dale. So when we run those, and like Dale mentioned, it's an EI of 8 or greater for wind or water. It's not both. So when you run this, you get your EI calculations. You're going to look at it and you're going to go, first example here, we have one that we have a water EI of 10. That's 8 or greater. So that makes that eligible. in the other example on the right side of the screen, you're going to see that it has two different EIs. There's wind and there's water, and that equals 8, but we can't use both. We've got to use one. And unfortunately, water's at 7. So in that instance, it's not eligible. So Jessica, I hope that that kind of answers your question about what these are. And Dale's going to show kind of a photo of like a wider super buffer applied on the ground.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. So yeah, this is a schematic of what we envision. And I would say to Jessica's question, I mean, we wouldn't rule out that if the whole field is within 1,000 feet, the whole field could potentially be enrolled, but in some cases not, right? So we have to stay true to that formula. And in this example, it doesn't take up the whole field, right? It truly is serving as a super buffer. And so you can see the edge of the cropland. We've demonstrated that it's an eligible body of water, and this is part of that needs and suitability, the feasibility worksheet. That also defines an eligible water body, as Kelly had mentioned in the chat. So if we can demonstrate that it has at least the EI of 8 or greater, the producer, we work with them to demonstrate what a maximum of 1,000 foot looks like. Typically, it's probably not going to be the whole field, but it could potentially be. And this is, again, what we envision that to look like. And there's certain advantages to this, right? So we're going to talk a little bit later about the CP21, which is a filter strip. But we do have some limits on widths of that. So if somebody really wants to go wider and they meet this criteria, this is what we're referring to as a super buffer. So, you know, as you ask yourself, why establish a super buffer? You know, again, the CREP CP1 introduced grasses, the CREP CP2 permanent native grasses. These are what we refer to currently as super buffers under our CREP agreement. So, you know, science-based research clearly shows that wider vegetative buffers along waterways have a positive impact to water quality, floodwater storage, and habitat for fish, birds, pollinators, and other wildlife. It also, again, this is where that average, I think, is attractive to landowners and farmers. Straightens irregular fields, keeps farm machinery away from steep banks, and avoids the need to plant in rows where crop yields are often lower due to soil compaction and other issues. So again, I think this is a good visual to kind of show what we envision this to look like within that criteria. The next CREP practice is the CREP CP5A. So this is a field windbreak. And so, you know, it's interesting as we talk about these practices, I always tend to think historically. And I can think back to when we were rolling out CREP initially, and Steve Shine, who was the CREP manager at the time, who's since moved on to the DNR. Steve and I were traveling to a meeting over by Gagetown in Tuscola County, and it was late spring, and it looked like every fence row had been removed in that neighborhood, and it was flat as could be. And the wind that day was so tremendous that the particles, the soil that was being dispersed, we literally had to stop the vehicle at one point to let that pass so that we could see to continue on to our journey. And it dawned on us, I mean, it was a very appropriate conversation as we tried to promote CREP and the importance maybe of establishing field windbreaks, which unfortunately seem to have fallen out of favor a little bit. So again, many of these have been removed as agricultural equipment has gotten bigger, farming practices have gotten bigger, but mainly because some of these were an inconvenience. So one thing we like to think of with windbreaks, whether it's with CREP, continuous CRP, EQIP, other efforts, is that maybe we have an opportunity to kind of reset the landscape and establish these in a convenient area and that we can justify. So we wanted to throw that out there to think about that. Again, farmers tend not to like to plant trees, but in certain areas where other practices may not be determined needed and feasible, we want to be thinking about field windbreaks. They do have tremendous value. So what are they? Again, you know, they're linear plantings of trees and shrubs designed to reduce wind speed in open fields, preventing soil erosion and protecting adjacent crops from wind damage. So again, they do provide benefits. Windbreaks are typically planted again in multiple rows perpendicular to the prevailing winds. Kelly pulled together a diagram that demonstrates that. On the downwind side of a well-established windbreak, wind is generally slow for a distance of 10 times the height of the trees. That's usually how we calculate these in terms of need. Old field windbreaks may need renovation to function properly, including removal and replacement of selected trees and shrubs. So again, sometimes when we talk about maintenance of windbreaks, we often have natural mortality. And if you end up with gaps in these, that is detrimental. And so we have to be mindful to make sure that we fill in those gaps so that these can fully function. Other environmental benefits are just to further emphasize those. Again, it's known that these reduce soil erosion from wind, protects water and air quality by providing a barrier against airborne soil, chemical drift, odors, and dust, provides wildlife food, cover, and travel corridors, diversifies agricultural landscapes. The landscapes that Steve Shine and I went through have very little diversity, very little balance in terms of conservation versus active agriculture. And then they sequester carbon, right? That's a big thing as we talk about some of the climate change incentives that are being put in place with some of these efforts. So again, why establish a field windbreak if you're trying to convince a landowner or a farmer? And it may be the landowner that's easier to convince, to be honest, than a farmer. But again, they protect crops from wind damage. I think we often don't think about that as an advantage of installing a field windbreak. May increase crop yields by 10% or more, especially in dry years. May improve crop photosynthesis and water use efficiency due to microclimate changes in temperatures and humidity. Improves irrigation efficiency. Helps manage snow drifts and soil moisture by dispersing snow more evenly across the cropland across the landscape. Provides opportunities for additional income from saleable tree shrub products such as nuts, berries, decorative floral material, etc. And adds scenic interest to fields and may increase property values. So again, the list probably goes on, but those are some major benefits that people can easily get their head around. The CREP CP5A field windbreak practice requirements. Again, the cropland must be devoted to a cover comprised of a minimum of 1 row of trees and 2 rows of shrubs. A maximum of 2 rows of trees plus 3 rows of shrubs. So again, one of the premises of CREP is wider is better. We definitely have a minimum, but we also have a maximum. If somebody wants to, sacrifice a little bit more ground and they want to go more rows, that provides more environmental benefit. Species are limited to those in the field office tech guide. The maximum width of a field windbreak and the spacing between windbreaks will be the minimum needed to reduce cropland erosion according to the field office tech guide, regardless of the purpose of the windbreak. And again, windbreak density of at least 40% meets the standard. The filter strips, the CP21, we often refer to. The CREP CP21 is simply a filter strip. And as we think about it, this is a practice that has little sacrifice in terms of acreage, but it has a huge environmental benefit for those that take certain lands out of production and establish a simple filter strip. And again, what is a grass filter strip? It's planted strategically, again, between fields and surface waters. Again, rivers, streams, lakes, drainage ditches to protect water quality. They slow runoff from fields, trapping and filtering sediment, nutrients, pesticides, and other potential pollutants before they reach the surface water. This is the slide that we often use and refer to, and this is actually a Saginaw County filter strip. So this is actually a Michigan picture, a typical drainage ditch on our landscape. On the left hand of the screen is a minimum width buffer strip, and on the other, we often see typically being farmed right to the edge of the ditch. And so, you can see the tons of sediment and the pounds of phosphorus and nitrogen that typically are deposited without a filter strip. Again, this is through modeling. These are generally accepted environmental degradations, I guess, without a filter strip. And then within a filter strip, just with a minimum width, it reduces 4 tons of sediment, 7 pounds of phosphorus, and 14 pounds of nitrogen. So, again, as you do the math, it's not the entire solution, but it is helpful. So again, the environmental impact of these are significant. Reduces the delivery on average 65% of the sediment, 70% of the nitrogen, and then 75% of the phosphorus. And as John indicated, we do have some additional practices now that are available under continuous, like saturated buffers. Under continuous, we have a constructed wetland, which is essentially a sediment basin on the outlet of a wider watershed. So there are some other practices available now that treat that subsurface drainage that we do not treat with a vegetative filter strip. But in combination, again, they have tremendous environmental impact. The practice benefits of voluntarily, adopting a filter strip, again, provides an alternative for marginal flood-prone cropland along creeks and streams. And as you folks know, as these things are cleaned out over the years and they try to spread the soils out along the edge, these are usually not very productive in comparison to the wider field because the soils tend to be jumbled up, compacted. And so it's not a huge sacrifice, but again, the environmental benefit, we want farmers and landowners to understand these are really a small sacrifice for what they provide environmentally. And these things, just like all of these practices, are very noticeable on the landscape. And I think it gives the general public an idea of how, the vast majority of farmers are good stewards. They're adopting these types of practices. But if you don't see them in a certain neighborhood or a certain county, you kind of wonder, what's going on in that particular neck of the woods. Why aren't people adopting these and understanding, the importance of adopting them? And as we mentioned, just like the super buffers, as we're referring to the CREP CP1s and CREP CP2, these allow farmers to straighten irregular fields, keeps farm machinery, again, away from steep banks and avoids the need to plant in rows where crop yields are often lower, again, due to soil compaction or just degraded soils due to the multiple cleanouts. Other benefits, again, may reduce flood damage on adjacent cropland, may lower expenses for drainage ditch maintenance. Under our original CREP rollout, we had several drain commissioners across the state within the CREP focus areas that started to provide assessment reductions for individuals within the watershed along the drain that had installed some of these voluntary practices. So again, kind of like RMA's cover crop incentive, drain commissioners stepped up and provided an incentive. And we share those with you folks because, again, in your neighborhoods and in your group, there's probably a lot of other incentives that we could add on to this effort to make it more attractive. And so we're anxious to hear from you folks too, once we get started, what some of those might be, so that others can, maybe recreate that back in their neck of the woods to further make these very attractive to be adopted. It aids compliance with setback requirements for manure application and certain herbicide labels, creates a highly visible sign of good stewardship, again, as I mentioned earlier. And then, these do provide habitat for important pollinator species that many crops rely upon, again, such as bees. And when we talk bees, we're talking native and non-native, right? Important to both. Under CREP, the minimum average width is not less than 50 feet, right? So that's the average. So there may be a point that is below the 50 feet. This gets to, again, the ability to straighten up some of these edges and the average maximum width not to exceed 150 feet. So again, you may have a portion that's wider than 150 feet, but those averages are important in the planning and contracting to stay within policy. And as it's mentioned here, this is out of the field office tech guide. The minimum acceptable width of a filter strip is 20 feet. So that's the narrowest that we would want to see, or that we should see a CREP filter strip. And then depending on site characteristics, landowner goals, applicable regulations, and voluntary conservation program requirements, wider filter strips, again, provide greater wildlife habitat benefits. So, you know, if you can convince somebody, if their objective is, you know, that they would like to see more wildlife species, they should be encouraged to go beyond the 50% average minimum and consider something wider that, again, has benefits. Now, one thing I want to add here too, that is we differentiated between the CP1 and CP2 under the CREP agreement. You know, again, the CP1 has to be introduced, CP2 has to be native. The CP21, the filter strips, it's really up to the landowner, right? So if they're more comfortable planting a filter strip to introduce grasses and legumes, the program allows that. If they want to plant natives and the soils and the conditions warrant that, we can accommodate that. So it's just important to understand certain practices have certain requirements, and then like this practice, it really is up to the soils, but maybe also is equally as important up to what the landowner is comfortable establishing and then maintaining. And so you're going to see a list of practices here, and we like to stress this because CP21s are not eligible to be used in conjunction with the following practices. So again, the CP9 is a continuous practice that is available. That's a shallow wildlife area. And if somebody you might be talking to about CREP, they say, you know, I really would like to put a shallow wildlife area on my property as well, and it meets the eligibility, that can be accomplished through continuous, not through CREP, but through continuous. And it is a great practice. But the point is the CP9 and the CP22, which we'll talk about next, is a riparian buffer. The 23A, those are our wetland restoration practices. And then the CP26, which is essentially a sedimentation basin. We'll talk more in depth about that. That's a Michigan-specific practice that came out of CREP. Those all require a buffer. So we would never have a CP21 around one of these practices. And the point is because they have their own buffer requirement. And there is a note here, if wildlife habitat is the only resource concern, the site is not eligible for CP21 filter strip. So here I need to insert, and we need to have a little conversation. My good friend, John Bauer, called me late yesterday afternoon. We were talking about kind of the dilemma that some of the technical folks face. So, you know, if you follow the field office technical guide in the standard, you know that there has to be a somewhat of a slope towards the water body for us to justify and determine needs and feasibility to place a filter strip there. Now, as we've been talking many times, through tillage or through drainage cleanouts, we lose that slope. But then what we see often is we have areas of concentrated flow. And so again, Brian Thomas would be the one having this conversation with you. And I always enjoy to hear him talk about these practices because he does have a lot of practical experience and he can speak from the technical aspect. But what we want folks to understand is, again, we have to be true to the standard as well as the policy. So if you have a eligible body of water, but the field drainage doesn't flow towards that drain, if it's for artificial reasons, CRP does allow for some shaping, right? So the shaping is not to hone down a natural feature, but it is in certain instances allowed because it basically alleviates some of the concentrated flow that you might see. So we wanted to share that with folks. One thing that was in error under our last CREP is there was always the temptation if the eligible body of water, for instance, only goes 3/4 down the field edge, the farmer is really probably wanting to establish it all the way to the end, right? So some cases we may legitimately only be able to put a filter strip along a certain segment or certain segments. Now, what we have that we didn't have back then, as we think about some of the continuous practices, is that we have prairie strips, we have pollinator habitat, we have bird buffers, we have other practices that are legitimate and can be determined needed and feasible to fill in some of those gaps. So again, you're going to have different contracts because those are different programs. But if a farmer wants to fill in some of those gaps that just aren't true to the field office tech guide, the standards and specs, or true to policy, we have other tools to do that. And so we feel that that's important. The other thing, the example John was showing me is, it was very apparent that a grass waterway might be applicable in some of those scenarios. But I also, John, I want to talk further about the CP26, because I think that might be something that might alleviate some of those concerns as well. But again, I've worked with John a long time and have immense respect for him, as I do all of you. And he wanted me to kind of cover this. And I think it's a topic that we'll have to have more conversations about, because you're going to see some things that we probably didn't even anticipate, but we always have to be true again to our standards and specs and policy. And it's tough though, because the farmers say, look, it's just another 50 feet. They can do it on their own if they want, but if we're going to put it under a program, it has to be true to that individual practice and to the program and to the field office tech guide. So if Kelly was here, she would kick me off that soapbox. So I'm going to move on and talk about the CREP CP22, the riparian buffer. So again, riparian buffers, they're natural vegetation from the edge of a stream bank out through the riparian zone. The vegetative zone serves as a buffer to pollutants entering the stream from runoff, controls erosion, and provides habitat and nutrient input into the stream. And again, and the example I was looking at with John is, a riparian buffer along an edge may be appropriate if a CP21 is not, just like potentially a field windbreak. Again, though, there is an aversion for farmers to plant trees at times. And again, I think we have to help them be more accepting of that possibility if some of the other practices don't seem applicable. So if somebody asks us, why establish riparian buffers, the environmental benefits that we could refer to is, again, it protects water quality by reducing the amount of sediment, excess nutrients, pesticides, and other pollutants entering the streams, ditches, lakes, wetlands, and other surface water. Reduces excess nutrients and other chemicals in shallow groundwater flows. Slows floodwaters and reduces stream water volume, actually more so than a grass filter strip, right? Because of the tree and shrub component, it slows the velocity of the floodwaters down compared to just grasses. It helps stabilize stream banks and shorelines through root absorption. Again, we don't do stream bank stabilization as a component of a CP22. But it does help stabilize what damage might be there by establishing this practice. It also, again, provides shade, shelter, and food for fish and other aquatic species. Shade is especially important for cold water species. Again, a lot of what we see is drainage ditches, but there are some cold water eligible water bodies out there where this is truly a benefit. And then provides habitat and travel corridors, again, for diverse plants and animals, especially birds, reptiles, and others that require water with adjacent woods. I think about our fish and wildlife folk friends that, have concerns yet about the copper-bellied water snake and the need for that species to have these riparian areas to move from habitat to habitat. As those are lost on the landscape, again, however you view snakes, I think they're beautiful, particularly the copper-bellied water snake. That one, again, it's a threatened species because of the loss of habitat. And so these types of practices are critical for so many species and for so many other organizations as they try to protect those. Again, practice benefits, it provides woodland recreational opportunities such as fishing, hunting, birding, hiking, and camping, potentially. Again, depending on the water source. Provides opportunities, again, for additional income, specifically woodland products such as nuts, berries, mushrooms, medicinal plants, and decorative floral materials such as flowers, boughs, stems, and vines. Creates a highly visible sign of good stewardship, again, especially along recreational streams. And again, I think that's an aspect that we don't typically think about and promote at times, but we all see it on the landscape because of our conservation eyes. And then, you know, just like the other practices, there is an advantage to straighten out irregular fields, keeping farm machinery away from steep banks and avoids the need to plant in rows. So again, it allows us to square some of these things up, which is practical, also in the maintenance of these types of practices over the lifespan of them. Other benefits, you know, again, provides a barrier against nearby dust, odor, noise, or light pollution. Adds scenic beauty and may increase property values, provides habitat for important pollinator species, again, native and non-native, as we talked earlier. The specific practice requirements of a CP22 under the Michigan CREP is, again, the minimum average width is not less than 50 feet, and the average maximum width not to exceed 180. The minimum, and again, this is from the Field Office Tech Guide, is for a riparian buffer is 35 feet. So we'd never see a point of a CREP CP22 any narrower than 35 feet. We may see it wider than 180, again, because we're looking at an average. And then depending on site characteristics, again, the landowner's goals that we always take into account, applicable regulations and voluntary conservation program requirements. Wider riparian buffers provide greater water quality and wildlife habitat benefits than narrower ones. Eligible cropland. So CP22 riparian buffers, there is a unique thing that we want to talk about here. And again, when we talk about eligible cropland, that is actually defined in the 2 CRP handbook. And again, as we talk about these acronyms, the FSA staff and the NRCS staff, they know when we refer to the 2 CRP handbook what that is. But for the rest of you, again, that's what we follow. It contains all of our national policy and our state policy, and it's what we have to stay within. And within that handbook, there is a subparagraph 181A that defines it. And it talks here about NRCS determinations. They have to determine based on a site visit and using the documentation of the suitability and feasibility worksheet that the cropland is suitable to be devoted to a riparian buffer. Again, devoted planted, or we can also consider natural regeneration. And again, that's dependent upon the professional opinion of the planner to trees, and trees. The cropland will again be devoted, planted, or to natural regeneration to trees. Land that is not suitable for tree plantings is determined by NRCS. It again is not eligible to be enrolled in the CRP as a CP22 riparian buffer, nor would it be in CREP. So this is where, you know, that those suitability and feasibility worksheets are so important. Our friend Gibb had mentioned earlier, you know, do we allow for, you know, water crossings and water sources if somebody puts in a riparian buffer and they happen to be have a grazing operation. We do cost share on exclusion fencing, crossings as Kelly captured here in a picture. And if that was their water source, we can also cost share on an alternative water source. So that is something that is a component of a CRP CP22, and that carries into our CREP. And with that, Kelly's going to cover the next couple of slides to talk about marginal pasture land and help you folks understand, because that again is something different than cropland, which I just described. So with that, over to you, Kelly.
Hey, thanks, Dale. And one other point of clarification too is a CP21 also would be attractive for livestock operations. Same thing where we could offer exclusion fencing, stream crossings, and if they need a water source added, we would also cost share for that.
Thanks, Kelly, for that clarification.
Yes. So marginal pasture land, a lot of folks get confused with marginal pasture land because of the title of it. So one thing marginal pasture land is not is it's not cropland, it's not forest land, and it's not woodland. And so under no circumstances can land be considered cropland and marginal pasture land. Sorry about that. 10 CM FSA is what we need to go to for our provisions for removing land from cropland status to be enrolled under marginal pasture land criteria. That status that we use, that cropland status that actually fits what we describe as marginal pasture land, is rangeland. So it needs to fit that rangeland requirement. And we will get even further probably into the weeds on this next week for those that will be participating in the grassland CRP training session, because that is a requirement. It is marginal pasture land under that provision or rangeland that we use for that sign up type. So once again, NRCS is going to go out. They're going to do a site visit. They're going to do based on suitability and feasibility. You know, does the marginal pasture land, is it going to function and work right there? Can it be devoted, whether it's planted or natural regeneration, like Dale just spoke about? Here's a note here that marginal pasture land devoted to wildlife habitat buffers must be enrolled as a CP29. So something to recognize and think about NRCS when you're out. If it's not going to fit under CREP, we might have something that it fits under continuous CRP. In these types of notes and stuff like this, they are in that sheet that I demoed yesterday. So that's meant to be kind of like a one-stop shopping to help you guys with those determinations as well, and some of those side notes. So land that is not suitable for tree plantings as determined by NRCS is not eligibly enrolled as a CP22 for a riparian forest buffer. And also infeasible to farm provisions only apply to the cropland. And so we did have a question earlier in the chat, do infeasible to farm provisions apply with CREP practices? And they do, the same as they would with CCRP. There is no difference there as far as that applicability. And Dale, if you would click your mouse real quick, it'll kind of bring up a slide just to show, you know, you might see some of this on the landscape or when we're doing photos and stuff. I know for a fact, because this is a neighbor of mine that has actually marginal pasture land. It's right along a brook, you know, and there's areas there that, you know, maybe they're not within the CREP watershed. So we can't talk to them about enrolling in CREP, but maybe they should be looking at a CP22 in those areas and stuff. Could be planning a riparian forest buffer along portions of that creek. So just something to point out as far as what it might look like from an aerial image. And Dale, yeah.
So the other thing that's always confused me is, again, you know, the pasture land. It's important that folks understand that this does not necessarily have to be pastured. It may never have been pastured, but currently it meets that marginal rangeland definition, and there's a demonstrated needs and feasibility to establish, right? There's not enough trees and shrubs, but again, there's a resource concern to justify it. So that's important for people to understand. It doesn't necessarily mean it's ever been pastured, is currently being pastured, or, you know, maybe pastured in the future. That's not a requirement. So that's important as well. So thanks, Kelly, for covering that. There is some additional cost share that Kelly's going to cover as well with this practice.
Thank you. So to muddy the waters a little bit, this is a statutory thing. We are authorized and we do have to pay cost share for management activity for CP22 only. So as another point of discussion on that sheet I demonstrated, worksheet yesterday, I demonstrated there is a column that's been added for, you know, federal management cost share, and it's gonna just have a yes for CREP to help you guys navigate that. So under the Michigan CREP, this means an activity conducted after the riparian buffer is established as determined by CCC, which is the Commodity Credit Corporation, which is our funding mechanism and who we do these contracts on behalf of. FSA as the administrators. And that's to maintain or enhance the vegetative cover of the riparian buffer. And Dale, if you would take this to the next slide. So these are the activities that are authorized for management for a CREP CP22 buffer. So we have currently what we have identified for CP22s in the state for management activities is tree and shrub pruning and forest stand improvement. Now, the one nuance with this currently that we have is that when they elect this activity, we're only going to pay them at the lowest cost activity. So that's why you see that these all have the same not to exceed rate. So regardless of, you know, pruning for wildlife may cost quite a bit more out of pocket than what's on the screen. But currently as policy stands, we can't pay any more than, let's say, if pruning, you know, the low height is the lowest cost mechanism, that's what we have to cost share at. Same thing for the forest stand improvement. So, and normal cost share provisions apply where the total cost share payments from all sources shall not exceed 100% of the cost of the practice. This is not an activity that you will turn around and send to MDAR for them to provide additional cost share. They're only doing cost share for the establishment of a practice up front, and we're going to get into this here shortly. They will be providing some maintenance and some management payments to start with. So Dale, a couple other questions we had in the chat before we move forward about one with filter strips are huge in our area. They know they're going to have questions going to be asked once the word is out. Can a producer who just signed up last fall and there is nothing planted for the resource concern, can they pay and get out on that contract and apply for CREP? In that instance, I say yes. Then they also posted in here, what about, you know, if they had to re-enroll because there was already a CP21 established on the ground? Well, there's a reason why they couldn't have a break in contract because of the resource concern. In those instances, because we didn't offer CREP at that time, they're going to have to stay with that.
Yeah, I would agree, Kelly. So, you know, those are the things too, as you run into those scenarios, you know, utilize all of us to clarify, you know, before you move forward. We want to give you guys the certainty. And we know what we've covered in the last day and a half here, or the 2 days, is, you know, just the tip of the iceberg. So, you know, we're going to want some feedback, and again, we're going to be available to help you with those one-offs, if you will. And again, if we see it in one area, others are probably struggling with it across the other watersheds as well in counties. So did that get us up to date on the questions, Kelly?
It does, and I think I just would like to add that, you know, as far as like the refund for like liquidated damages, remember folks that your county committees, if they decide, you know, because the person's going to re-enroll and they feel that we're just going to waive those, they've got to document that they can only waive up to 50%, and then they've got to make a case and it has to be sent to the state committee in order for us to consider waiving those liquidated damages for terminating a contract. And obviously if they got a SIP, you know, they would have to refund that as well. And we'll have to work through as far as how we work forward on that.
Good point, Kelly, and those, the nuances, right? There's always nuances, but they are very important. So this screen should look familiar. We covered this with the CREP CP21. So just like this, the CREP CP21, the filter strip, the CREP CP22, the riparian buffer is not allowed in conjunction with those listed practices for the same reason, right? Those practices require a buffer component for them to be eligible for enrollment. So that takes us into the CREP CP23 and the CREP and the CREP CP23A. These are the wetland restorations. And so as we proceed, you'll again, these nuances, it should be clear the difference between a 23 and a 23A, and it's subtle, but there are some differences. So, and before our CREP, to be honest, we outside of WRP, we saw very few wetland restorations occurring under any of the other efforts. And so when CREP came along, that really spiked the interest through CREP in wetland restorations across the state. And then once people saw the benefits of these on the landscape, it just kind of took off. And so we anticipate, again, this will be a fairly attractive practice pursued under this current CREP. And you do have to have a pretty motivated person to do this, right? It may not be a farmer, it may be the landowner that really has the interest in taking land out of production and restoring the hydrology to whatever extent they're comfortable doing. So again, when we talk about wetland restorations, it's the manipulation of a former or degraded wetland's physical, chemical, or biological characteristics to return its natural functions. Restoration practices include reestablishment, again, the rebuilding of the former wetland, and rehabilitation, repairing the functions of a degraded wetland. And in many cases, we're somewhat limited on what we can do by the landowner's objectives, but also, possibly if it would affect, a drainage district activity. So, there are some limitations with this. But as we ask ourselves, why establish, restore wetlands? Again, wetlands can play a role in reducing the frequency and intensity of floods by acting as natural buffers, soaking up and storing a significant amount of flood water. A wetland can typically store about 3 acre feet, 3 acres covered in water, 3 feet deep, or 1 million gallons of water. So it's substantial. Coastal wetlands serve as storm surge protectors when storms come ashore. Barrier islands, shoals, marshes, forested wetlands, and other features of the coastal landscape can provide a significant and potentially sustainable buffer from wind wave action and storm surges. And one of the successes of our last CREP effort, besides the 5,000 acres that Kelly referenced yesterday that was permanently protected under a component of our CREP, where people voluntarily put permanent conservation easements on top of their contracts. Again, I think that's cool. It's a legacy to all the folks that were involved in that back then. That's a significant piece of Michigan that was restored, typically through these practices that will remain as wetlands. So, but the other is there was a number of individuals that owned and farmed close to the Saginaw Bay wildlife area. Those folks were encouraged to voluntarily enroll under CREP under the first tranche. And the agreement was once those contracts expired, then the refuge essentially would pull those into the refuge. And the refuge manager shared with us, and I think we tried to distribute that to the folks in that area, that after the Sanford Dam broke a few years ago, they credited the CREP adjacent to the refuge as limiting some of the potential damage. They indicated that without that addition, that capacity, it would have been so much worse downstream. So I share that with you folks because, again, when we're promoting voluntary conservation, we know it's a good thing. Intuitively, we know it's a good thing. We're all passionate about it, but it's always rewarding when you see down the road a ways when something occurs that was mitigated a bit by some of your efforts out there. So I wanted to make sure we shared that today. I think it's really a cool story, and who knows what we're going to accomplish now. We'll mitigate some of those types of things in the future. The environmental benefits, again, of establishing, restoring wetlands, it's fact, but 64% of the world's wetlands have disappeared since 1900, right? So when our settlers came in, it was just natural to convert some of these into farmland. We wouldn't have the food and fiber we do today if they didn't, be so industrious and undertake that hard work. And then only 3% of the world's water is fresh, as we mentioned yesterday, in honor of the World Water Day. But and most of that is frozen, at least at the moment. On average, each person uses 5 to 13 gallons of water per day for drinking, cooking, cleaning. Wetlands, again, help provide the clean, reliable supplies of fresh water people need for our daily lives. And again, I know myself, I tend to take it for granted. I try not to, but it's hard not to. Wildlife nursery, right? So these, because of its unique location between water and land, salt and freshwater wetlands shelter more than 1/3 of the country's threatened and endangered species. Without wetlands, a huge number of songbirds, waterfowl, shellfish, mammals just wouldn't exist. And again, as I think about this, another thing that Kelly and I are responsible for is the highly erodible and wetland conservation compliance, right? So many of those wetlands are not regulated wetlands. The only protection that they have is through that linkage. And so it's another, I think, conservation effort that we're involved in, even though it's certainly a different focus. But again, even those small isolated wetlands have significant value and they're worth protecting, which is why Congress linked USDA benefits with that requirement. Again, we talked about the flood control, right? Wetlands function like a sponge, soaking up water that comes in with the tides. Again, we don't necessarily have tides, but from periodically flooding rivers, in fact, they control floods much more effectively and efficiently than any flood walls. Pollution filter. If trees are the lungs of the planet, then wetlands are the kidneys. You folks probably have heard that on the Rogue River in near Detroit, Michigan. A wetland demonstration project showed significant reductions in nitrates, phosphorus, and heavy metals. Clean and plentiful drinking water depends again on healthy wetlands. And I'll point out, as I shared with you folks yesterday, when Kelly hung out of that Vietnam era observation plane, which was flown, by the way, by a Coast Guard pilot who actually was a pilot in Vietnam. And Kelly literally hung out the window that day, I believe, with her own camera. And this was another one of those pictures. This is a wetland restoration under the original CREP that folks pursued a conservation easement on it. I believe recently, I want to say our friends at Ducks Unlimited purchased this property, and I believe it's been since donated to the DNR. So it's had quite a journey. You can see how close it is to Lake Huron. And part of the other photos Kelly took is, I believe, about 2 miles upstream from this wetland restoration, the drain, or which was originally a stream in that neck of the woods, was protected by filter strips. So, as we were up in the air, you could see these things clearly. It was heartening, but it was also disheartening when you saw all the gaps in the need for this type on other areas of the landscape. But again, it takes me back, Kelly, to that day when you were hanging out the window. Whenever I see that picture, I think it's a real success story, and I appreciate you putting yourself in harm's way for the better cause here. So, again, specifically looking at, establishing, restoring wetlands, again, the practical benefits, we're looking again at the ecosystems, helps filter sediments, chemicals to improve, again, water quality, the flooding benefits, recharge of the groundwater, and then again, just other recreational benefits, right? These are tremendous habitats for game species as well as non-game species. But again, folks retain the right to recreate on these. And I think that's sometimes a huge objective for folks to pursue these and enter into contracts. And again, they're great for observing wildlife and for migrating birds and waterfowl, certainly. And again, amphibians, reptiles, and other animals dependent on these habitats. Creates a highly visible sign, again, of stewardship. These are very visible. They tend to get a lot of conversation going. And sometimes they're great sites to take somebody to, right? You may have a landowner that would allow you to take interested folks out to some of these sites to say, hey, I want to get a sense what this practice is. And if you have a landowner that's willing to assist in that type of promotion, that's great. So as we talk about some more of the practice requirements and some of the specifics, beyond the 10,000-foot view of why these things are important and valuable. And again, total eligible cropland or wetland restoration is limited to cropland. So it has to be based on those eligibilities Kelly covered yesterday. And again, that's in paragraph 151 of this 2 CRP handbook. The 23, in contrast to the 23A, has to be within a 100-year floodplain of a permanent river or stream. And sometimes that's difficult. If we don't have good FEMA maps to demonstrate that, then we typically look at the CP23A, which doesn't require it to be within a 100-year floodplain. So that's the key difference. The 23 has to be within a 100-year floodplain. If there aren't good FEMA maps, we understand that some of the Eagle district offices can assist in determining if that truly is within a 100-year floodplain. But again, we tend to gravitate towards the 23A if we don't have the certainty of FEMA maps. In this case, it also has to include a minimum of 51% hydric soils for the acreage to be offered. And again, this is the restored area, what we refer to as the non-buffer areas. And again, the purpose of this practice is to restore the natural hydrology, not to create a wetland. So for CRP purposes, if somebody is interested in kind of creating a wetland, that's where they really should look at or be directed to that CP9, that shallow wildlife area. This is true restoration again, and it's restoration to the level that's feasible and to the level of the producer's comfort as well. And then an offer that includes a buffer outside the 100-year floodplain may be enrolled if otherwise eligible, needed, and feasible for this practice. Look a little bit deeper. Again, the amount of adjacent upland acreage to be enrolled shall be determined by NRCS. The amount of the adjacent upland acres is limited to the minimum number of acres that's providing the protection to the buffer, to the crop wetland, and to enhance wildlife habitat. May be less than 3-to-1, shall not exceed a 3-to-1 ratio. So again, we have the restored area, and then if there's buffer acres available or these upland acres, then we have to stay within those ratios, and again, within the needs and feasibility. So focusing now from the CP23, which is the 100-year floodplain practice, the CP23A is a wetland restoration non-floodplain. And so again, this practice must be located outside the 100-year floodplain. And then eligible cropland must meet the requirements again in subparagraph 181A of the 2 CRP handbook. There is a note, cottonwoods may be planted to enhance the viability of other hardwood trees, oaks, etc. The purpose of this practice again is to restore the natural hydrology, not to create a wetland. So again, if that's their objective, that's where that CP9 or some of the other conservation efforts may be a better fit. The amount of adjacent upland acreage to be enrolled shall be determined again by NRCS. The amount of adjacent upland acres is limited again to the minimum number of acres to provide a protective buffer to the crop wetland and to enhance wildlife habitat. It may be less than 4-to-1, but it can exceed that 4-to-1 ratio. So another nuance to this practice, the CP23 is a 3-to-1, the 23A is a 4-to-1. One thing we ran into under the last sign up was that some of these were maybe a 40-acre field owned by a participant. It was all hydric, it was all restorable, but there really was no buffer available. And so that's an example of how you may have a wetland restoration that clearly is just restoration. There is no buffer component because there is none available on the acreage that's being offered. So we ran into that quite a few times, and we wanted to clarify moving forward. So the last of the 8 practices before we get into the financials is the CREP CP26, the sediment retention control structure. And again, this is something that was developed out of Lenawee with the staff down there that saw the need, and it demonstrated how CREP allows us to be creative at times to create something that has environmental benefits that may not be available at the time. Just like we always want to crow on our Michigan success with our CRP safe native pollinator focus. Again, we're proud of that just because it was the first of its effort in the country, and now it's a national practice. The CP26, because of the size of these, it hasn't taken off, but we think it still has applicability and value, and it's available yet under our CREP agreement. So again, these are small. It's a small earthen ridge and channel or embankment built across perpendicular to a small water course or area of concentrated flow within a field. They're commonly built in a parallel series with the first ridge crossing the top of the water course and the last ridge crossing the bottom, or nearly so. They're designed to trap agricultural runoff water and sediment as it flows down the water course. This keeps the water course from becoming a field gully and reduces the amount of runoff and sediment leaving the field. So again, you know, a grass waterway, which is not available under CREP, but it is under continuous. It's available under EQIP. Some folks, you know, this may be an issue across multiple properties. And I'm thinking, John Bauer, with your piece, it might be easier to convince folks across multiple pieces of property to put a CP26 in at each needed interval versus trying to convince them to have a collective grass waterway established that they would have to farm around. So again, this has some real applicability. We haven't seen much of it beyond Lenawee County, but we want to promote it, and we think there's, again, applicability across all watersheds. So again, why establish it? It reduces agricultural runoff and sediment loading in nearby streams, prevents small areas of concentrated flow from becoming gullies, helps control erosion on area of hilly land where slopes are not uniform enough for practices that flow the contour, and improves the farmability of cropland with irregular topography. So again, just some of the advantages. And again, what we're viewing on this slide is where we think we can address some of these concerns. This is something Kelly pulled forward. Again, the benefits of these basins. It provides floodwater storage, reduces and manages runoff, reduces peak stream flow after storm events by 5% on average, reduces total suspended solids in runoff by 80% and phosphorus load to surface waters by 85%. So again, with our increasing concerns with phosphorus loading, this is a great practice to utilize where appropriate on the landscape. It can reduce the load of pollutants such as nitrogen, metals, bacteria, and hydrocarbons to streams. And again, it reduces gully erosion, similar to a grass waterway, but it's a less aggressive application and maybe more palatable in certain situations. And again, you know, as we ask ourselves, why establish sediment retention control structures? As we mentioned, they detain precipitation runoff during storm events and slowly discharge the water through a stable outlet. That's the key. Reducing stream flow again by 5% on average. Sediment in the runoff is deposited in the basin, removing 80% of the total suspended solids in runoff, reducing the phosphorus load by up to 85%, and improving downstream water quality. These basins eliminate gully erosion and can also remove pollutants again, such as nitrogen, metals, bacteria, and hydrocarbons. The dry basin between the storm events and maintain land function and farmability and vegetation along the basin edge also provides, in certain situations, a degree of wildlife habitat. This is a schematic, you know, and it demonstrates the effectiveness of this practice. And this is how we were able to convince Washington back in the day that, hey, we want to make this part of our CREP agreement, and they allowed it, and they're allowing us to continue with it. So again, this practice must include an adequate buffer area of perennial vegetation to protect the water quality and provide wildlife habitat. And again, introduced or native, depending on the objective in the soils and the planner's recommendation. The width of the buffer shall be determined again by soil type, slope, and conservation practices applied on the field. The earth embankment in inundated area must be devoted to a cover comprised of a mixed stand of at least 2 4 or legume species best suited for site conditions in accordance with the NRCS Field Office Tech Guide. The buffer area of perennial vegetation is to protect the water quality will be designed and again determined by NRCS, taking into account the landowner's objective if they have an opinion in that regard. Some of the other nuances, again, the structure shall be designed to control runoff from a 10-year, 24-hour duration storm. These do, again, require a design, and then they may require some consultation as a result as well. The basin shall have the capacity, again, to store an anticipated 10-year sediment accumulation. Again, in theory, these may have to be cleaned out periodically. The basin shall have a maximum of 1 foot of freeboard to provide for an emergency spillway around one or both ends of the embankment. And the maximum settled height of the structure shall be 15 feet measured from the natural ground at the center line of the embankment to the top of the fill material, excuse me. Again, the design height, shall not exceed 15 feet. The maximum inundated area shall not exceed 1 acre per structure. The county committee cost share portion of each structure, not including the buffer area, has a limited not to exceed $6,000. So again, one of those nuances we have to live with. All portions of the sediment retention control structure, the embankment, the buffer, and the inundated area will be seeded to an approved cover, again, consistent with the soil type and the intended purpose. And again, the practice, including the buffer area, shall not exceed 10 acres per tract. So you may have multiple of these, and so we have to be also mindful of that 10 acre per tract limit as we reference here. So with that, we threw a lot at you folks. This is really the culmination of the practice discussion. We will share with you that our good friend Brian Thomas, he has created program sheets for each of these practices. He's created the needs and feasibility worksheets for each of these practices. And once you folks see those and you start promoting this and installing these practices, everything we've covered will make a lot more sense to you. And again, some of the folks out there have a lot more experience. So for you folks that are just starting out on your journey, again, utilize all of those local resources to help you speed up, your learning curve, if you will. And so with that, Kelly, I don't know if there's any questions we should address before you go into maintenance and management of these practices.
Yes. Yeah. So we did have a follow-up one that asked, does the marginal pasture land, how does it work with cropping history, and does that go under infeasible to farm? So as I stated before, marginal pasture land is not cropland. So it's not going to require that 4 out of 6 year or the 12-year cropping rotation, because that's for cropland. That's where we have to demonstrate that it can actually be cropped on a regular basis or planted to an agricultural commodity. And it specifically stated that infeasible to farm acres do not apply to marginal pasture land. The next question, Dale, was what are the seeding requirements for a CP21 introduced native number of species? It says, sorry if I missed that. And we don't have any requirements. The cover is according to the site condition and the lander's objectives.
Yeah, we did cover, the minimum number of grasses and forbs and legumes, but we don't have any specific mixes. That's true. That's again dependent on the soils and the site. But the key there too is a landowner or a farmer can go introduced or native. They don't have to, necessarily go native, although we prefer it for the wildlife benefit enhancements. But again, if they want to give us introduced and the soil support it, we'll take it within those, minimum requirements.
Yep. And then question was asked about this was for the CP23 and 23As, does this require engineering and SHPO? And as we know, it kind of depends on the activities that are occurring, a CP23 or 23A, participant only has to restore the hydrology to their comfort level. So meaning it could be just a grass planting, but
Well, Kelly makes me, it could be natural regeneration as well, right? We've had some of those. Now, we have to be mindful of invasives and encroachment, when we do a natural regeneration. But to your point, yeah, they could be that minimum. And there could be some SHPO and some consulting that we have to do, again, depending on the level of restoration that's being recommended and that the producer is willing to do.
And then the last question that we have currently is, after reviewing the current practices, I'm wondering what exactly are the roles of the meat techs, and what do we do as FSA needed to communicate to them? Do we need to help them, the techs, to explain the practices to the producers that have interest? This is all a little murky to me.
Okay, good point. I'm fortunate. I serve on the MEAP advisory committee, and I've gotten acquainted since serving in that capacity with the MEAP technicians. And again, as these folks, these MEAP technicians are working with farmers and landowners to meet the various certifications, the USDA voluntary programs available, and like CREP, they often promote because these are essential for folks to meet those basic certifications. And so, a way for them to demonstrate that they are a good steward, they're using all the best management practices available to them, CREP being one of those tools. So again, one of the things that made CREP so successful, and a shout out to our friend Mike Parker, who they still employ farm bill biologists, and those folks were so essential. We called them CREP techs back in the day, but they did so much promotion, just as we anticipate the meat techs will. Again, we want the meat techs. We're glad they're participating in the session yesterday, so that they have a better sense. But they're once they get their head around this, we anticipate they're going to be promoting it as they talk to landowners. If they see that it fits their operation, it might get them to meet one of these certifications. That's what we anticipate they're going to do, and we expect that they will do that. But the key is, many of them are fairly new to their position. Some of them have been around for a while, but CREP is probably new to all of them. And so that's where Lauren, you and some of the other seasoned staff, and I chuckle, you're not as seasoned as I am, but you've been around a bit. We do have to help those folks understand the nuances of this and help them through the learning curve, because once they do, they're going to be a tremendous asset to this effort to promote it. And again, not just CREP, they promote everything, but CREP is new to them for the most part. So hopefully that answers your question. And so Kelly, that looks like all the questions for now. So for the sake of time, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about maintenance and management.
All right, thank you, Dale. So there always is a lot of confusion about what is maintenance versus management activities. Maintenance, that is something that participants are responsible to do after NRCS completes the site visit to determine that the cover is fully established. They're required to do this according to the conservation plan, and it's always without additional cost share assistance. So maintenance activities are typically conducted for weed control and or insect to prevent undesirable species from negatively impacting the approved cover. So a lot of those activities might include mowing, spraying, even prescribed burning if it's required. One thing we want to make sure we stress, and we have in bold here, is mowing for cosmetic purposes or generic weed control is prohibited and will result in financial penalties. Maintenance activities should really be conducted outside the primary nesting season unless they have put a written request into the county committee, and then the county committee also has to consult with NRCS or whoever the technical service provider is that's responsible for the practice, that it's needed during those times, and then it's prescribed, and we would go ahead and approve that. So we got to make sure that we have it in writing, we have it documented, and we also have consulted with whoever the TSP is responsible for the practice. So here we're talking about primarily what our recommended maintenance activities are: grass plantings. Once again, it's going to be mowing, herbicide, or prescribed burning, tree plantings, and maybe herbicides or mechanical methods. But it also talks about that mowing typically is ineffective for weed control around with trees. And so it's really not one of those activities that's highly recommended. At NRCS, this might hit home for you more to think about the technical practice of a 314 or a 315 is really more applicable to maintenance activities. So with that, Dale, if you would go ahead and go on to the management activities. And so management activities, and this talks about beginning June 13th, 2019. So, for a while there, every practice required a management activity. Well, then there was changes made to the farm bill, and we were required to provide a list at DAFP of what those were, and then also if we were going to have any exemptions for certain practices or maybe an area of a practice, which we do have. So we have what's called Michigan Exhibit 5 that lists what our specific management activities are. So we have to have those scheduled, and they must be completed on a practice if it's required. So management activities are designed to ensure plant diversity. So that's like, light disking, maybe we need to invigorate what's out there on the landscape while ensuring the protection of soil and water resources. So they're site specific, and they are used to enhance wildlife benefits and also to increase diversity of what's going on out there on the landscape. The one thing with management activities is they're to be completed before the end of year 6 with a 10-year contract, or before year 9 when we're getting into a 15-year contract. We should not be having any kind of required management activity occurring during the last 3 years of a CRP contract. That means the initial required management activity. If we have something where we're doing an additional management activity, so think about, we require more than one management activity for the pollinator habitats, the CP42s. So when they're having that second one done, we can do that and plan that for in year 8. And then we also can look at it again for year 13 of a 15-year contract. Something we want to make sure everybody's aware of, and I know FSA staff is we have to do these quarterly reportings on our cost share obligations. And one of the things that they look at is when this is being prescribed and if it actually is within the last 3 years of the contract. And we have to justify what that is, if it is an additional management activity or not. So NRCS, I know in the past we'd had where we were divvying up and saying over so many acres, we would push this out over so many years. We've taken that out of our management requirements. So once again, recommended activities, we're looking at, it can be grass specific herbicide, prescribed burning, light disking, and it may involve interseeding. Tree plantings, that's where we get into the thinning or pruning, and we don't cost share for management activities. The only one that we've got this twist for is, as I talked about a few slides ago, is for the CREP CP22.
So Kelly, this speaks to the status reviews as well. And I think back to Lauren's question, again, with meat technicians and all of the other folks out there that are interested in supporting this is part of that journey through the contract, right? Once we get these established, Kelly's describing the importance of us assisting these folks and ensuring that they're maintaining and managing these, very important. So Kelly, I noticed now, it sounds like we might be going in and out a little bit, and so they're asking if maybe we'll be doing a Q&A. We typically do put together common questions and answers. We actually have, it's available within FSA, a question and answer spreadsheet, but again, we'll make that available to others as well. It looks like we've addressed all the questions. If there's nothing pressing, we want to continue on to get into some of the financials. So Chastity's wanting to be clear, there is no reimbursement for management activities, even under CREP, with the one exception of the CP22. That's correct, but when Kelly gets into the financials, the state of Michigan is providing some incentives for that. That's correct, Kelly?
Yes.
So again, so the question is, will meat techs be doing status reviews? They may. Again, NRCS and FSA, our relationship is formalized in a national memorandum of agreement. Joel Johnson, our former SED, always referred to that as a memorandum of appreciation, because the technical side of this is tremendous. And it's not uncommon that the local NRCS staff, through their oversight, will train local technicians who they feel have the skills and have been trained to do some of this late work. So I would envision maybe some of the DCs out there will utilize some of the meat technicians, as they will some of the other technicians, for some of these required processes. Again, this is where this extra boots on the ground is really important.
Dale,
So, again,
if you don't mind, if I can jump in here a little bit too, just to provide some perspective from MDARD. So first of all, we have issued a total of 7 grants to conservation districts across the CREP watersheds with specific requirements for them to actively help implement CREP. Everything that was kind of covered in that sign up process yesterday, from promotion to field visits and status reviews and helping with conservation planning. So those folks will be actively involved in signing up and helping people enroll in CREP. In addition, Dale had mentioned that Mike Parker and the DNR have several Farm Bill biologist grants issued to conservation districts in these watersheds. We also have an agreement with NRCS that employs a number of CTI soil conservationists and engineers who obviously will be actively involved in this as well. So we have ramped up some technical assistance support to help with CREP, and then on top of that we have the MEP technicians. Now we are not requiring, we did not add additional duties in those MEP grants requiring them to be involved with CREP. However, we're hoping that they'll see the value of this additional tool for the farmers that they work with, and we'll be promoting the program, and on a case-by-case basis, as determined by each conservation district board and their manager and those local MEP programs. They may have varying levels of involvement in helping to implement CREP. It could be as simple as promotion or marketing at field days, and it could be as much as helping do status reviews or conservation planning. So that's going to vary at the field office level, how that partnership works locally amongst the district, NRCS and FSA. But generally, we do anticipate them having some level of involvement, and we have additional technical assistance that will be provided to implement CREP. So hopefully that clears it up a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think that does, emphasize the investment, the collective investment in this beyond the financials that Kelly's going to get into. So that's another, major component. But we did recognize and learn from our first go around, we really have to shore up the technical end of this. And that's where we mentioned yesterday, Albert Jones, the area conservationist out of Flint, he's been working behind the scenes tirelessly on some of these components, which will become very apparent as we get moving. So again, we're well prepared to make this successful. We do want to get into the financials. So, that's the last component really that we wanted to cover. So there is more. Bear with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to get into the financial incentives, what makes this so attractive for people to voluntarily, adopt these practices and others we've been talking about. So with that, over to you, Kelly.
Hey, thanks, Dale. And yeah, we really do believe with what the package was that we worked with the state of Michigan on for incentives for CREP is really going to bring folks in the door, and we're going to have a lot of piqued interest. So we're anxious to kind of roll this out and let you guys know what those are. As we've been talking about the last couple of days, and especially John and Dale yesterday and today, we've talked a little bit about disproportional benefits. So that's where we're talking about some of these acreage, and a lot of what we're targeting, it's more marginal land. And so sometimes those low yielding areas are the great opportunity for us to integrate conservation practices. So, low yielding acres sometimes are our highest yielding conservation acres and benefits. So something to think about as you're going through and selling these various practices to the participants. So next slide, please, Dale. So we're going to have a cost share limitation exception under CREP. As you all know, under the 2018 Farm Bill, practice incentive payments became a part of cost share. And so we're at that 100% cap when we're paying cost share and we're paying PIP. Well, there is verbiage that does allow for us under CREP on a case-by-case basis with the Secretary's approval to go above that 100%, and we will be in this case. So we will be providing 50% cost share, CCC will. The state of Michigan is going to be providing 50% cost share, and then we will be providing a practice incentive payment, or as we call PIP, in the amount of 10%. So our cap is going to be 110% for cost share.
So Kelly, key point there too, right? If somebody's debating between introduced or native, but they're concerned a little bit about cost, you know, again, these are going to be within our not to exceed rates, but that kind of nullifies that, right? We can encourage people to go native and not be so fearful of the cost because of this arrangement.
Yes. So in this example, because we're going to go and talk through what new enrollment is versus re-enrollment, because there is a difference in the incentives, not only what FSA will be providing, but also what the state of Michigan will be providing. So the table for the federal payments, that actually will be into CRP. The state payments will not, but we are working with our state partners to provide a document out there for our folks as well as participants to use for that. This also has been captured in that workbook to help you have those conversations. So as you can see, we're going to be adding the climate smart as applicable to the practice stands into CRP. And you'll see that there's not one assigned to the CP26. So that's not going to earn a climate smart. They're going to earn 50% cost share. If it's newly enrolled acreage, they're going to get a SIP, which is based on 32.5% of their first full year's annual rental payment. As we know, with any type of continuous CRP, we might have a partial year payment. So it's always the first full payment. PIP is not going to be applicable to the CP 1s and 2s. That's how that stands under national policy, but we're going to provide a 10% PIP for all of the practices. So for the field windbreak, for the filter strips, riparian buffers, wetland restorations, and for the sediment control structure. All practices are going to earn what we're going to call the rental rate incentive. They're going to get an additional 40% added onto their soil rental rate. Some of these practices under CCRP, we offer what's called a maintenance rate incentive. And that's where you might see, like if they have fencing, that's an additional $5 an acre or any of those types of things. We're not offering that because that's actually going to be covered in the state side of things. So now we move across and we look at the state, they're going to provide 50% cost share across the board on all practices. They also have what they're offering as an enrollment bonus, and that's going to depend on what the practices that's being installed. They're not providing one for CP 1s and 2s, but they're providing $150 an acre for the 5A, the 21, 22, and the 23, 23A. CP 26, that's also going to get $150 for an enrollment bonus. As I stated yesterday, I talked about that after the practice is established, so that's going to be a part of when they do those status reviews. Remember that we're doing establishment status reviews now. When we know that the practice has been successfully established, we're going to reach out to MDARD and let them know, and then they're going to pay these maintenance and management payments. So those vary by practice, and you can see that it's quite a bit more for the sediment control structure, but we also know that there may be more maintenance and management involved with those than these other practices. So those are to help with participants with the costs that they're going to be incurring when they're doing management and maintenance activities on these contracts. An additional incentive, and this is only applicable to newly enrolled land, and it's for every practice other than the CP 1s and 2s, and this is in the Western Lake Erie only, they're going to have a $50 incentive payment per acre. So Dale, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, we're going to run through what's an example of if somebody was enrolling, their offer had 10 acres and it was for a CP21 for a filter strip. So it's going to get the additional incentives of a 3% climate smart and the 40% CREP soil rental rate incentive. So it's going to get an additional 43% added on top of the soil rental rate. As we look below, and folks that aren't familiar with how we do our terrace scenarios and how we look at the soils, it's going to bring forward what all the soils are that are in an offer. In the SPI, that is a soil productivity index that's assigned to each soil type. So we look at the three most predominant soils, and in this offer, those that are highlighted in yellow are the three most predominant soils. So we're going to add a 10% inflationary incentive. There's a rate here that shows you what that is. So we're just working off a straight up $100. They're going to earn that 10%. So it's going to make it $110. And by statute, there is a cap of 90% that we pay. So that gets reduced back down by 90% of that. And then the soil productivity is added to that. And then you're going to see what those adjustments are in the end. And that's where those soils may actually vary, or they may have a higher cap. Next slide, Dale. So in this example, we're looking at this, and our weighted average soil rental rate for this is going to be $100.63 an acre. We're also going to add that total incentive adjustment that I just talked about on the previous slide of 43%, which is $43.27 an acre. So our maximum rental rate for this soil rental rate, and that's with the Climate Smart, with the 40%, and even with that additional inflationary 10%, it's going to be $143.90 an acre. So their annual rental payment is going to be $1,439 for 15 years. And this is new acreage, a new contract, you know, could potentially have a 15-year contract. Here we're just taking and we're going, here's what the maximum annual rental rate is. Here's what the annual rental payment is for the 10 acres times, I got the 150 there. That should be 143. Sorry, folks. And then the signing incentive, which is 32.5%, which is an additional $467.68. In the state of Michigan, in this one, the enrollment bonus is $150 an acre, so they're going to get another $1,500. If this is in the Western Lake Erie Basin, they're going to get an additional $500 because they're getting $50 an acre. So we're looking at up front their first year, they could potentially be getting $2,467.86. So here's just the example of the cost share. So our federal reimbursements, we're going to say that it costs them $5,540 out-of-pocket cost, and that's eligible out-of-pocket cost. And so we're going to pay them half of that, which is the $2,770. They're also going to earn the PIP from us. So they're going to get 10% of that, which is $554. And then the state of Michigan, they're obviously going to match with what our 50% cost share was. So it once again, it's going to be $2,770. So if you look at this, they're actually getting more. As Dale stated before, we're giving them more for establishing the practice than what they actually spent for eligible out-of-pocket expenses. So to continue on with this, we're not going to issue any kind of maintenance or management payment because the state of Michigan is providing that. And so they're going to actually earn $1,000 for that. And that's going to be paid later in the contract. And this here in the screen just shows what those totals are, a summary of all of them. So the annual rental payments for 15 years, the federal CIP, the state enrollment bonus, the federal cost share, the federal PIP, the state cost share, the state management and maintenance bonus. So this tells you what over the course of 15 years would be earned. And then if it's in the Western Lake Erie, they're going to get that additional bonus. So here's just an example of CREP versus CCRP, so you know and can kind of do a quick comparison of what that might be, what the total amount is. We actually took this down to what the return per acre was, and then down to really what it comes out annually on an acre basis for all those monies that are in bonuses that are going to be paid out. I see there's some questions in the chat, just making it clear. There is no reimbursement for management activities under CREP, and I did answer that with the one exception for the CP22, and that is correct. So how does that work for maintenance payments? Do they notify us, turn in documentation? Do we send it? So they aren't going to provide us with any documentation on that. When we get the status reviews back saying that they have been established and they meet standards and specifications, we will notify MDARD. We have not determined exactly what that is going to be or how we're going to do that yet, because obviously we got a little time out yet before we're going to be issuing those types of payments.
Another quick point, Kelly. So the reason that this slide is important that Kelly covered, if somebody doesn't want to go as wide as CREP requires, or they don't want to go as long as the CREP contract requires, again, we want to nudge them to consider continuous. It's important that they understand the financial difference, but again, the point Kelly's making is, again, we want to capture it at the end of the day to meet their objectives as well.
So on to re-enrolled acres. So once again, they're still going to earn their climate smart incentive as it's applicable. We don't pay cost share on re-enrolled acres unless it's a change in practice. We don't pay SIP. We don't pay PIP. They still will earn the 40% rental rate. They're not going to get cost share, obviously, from the state of Michigan as well, because we're not paying cost share to establish the cover. They are going to get a re-enrollment bonus, and this is where the CP1s and 2s will get a re-enrollment bonus of $50 an acre. All other practices are going to get $150 an acre. Maintenance and management is going to remain the same, where it's $100 an acre for all practices except for the CP26, and that's going to be $500 an acre. And in this instance, because it's a re-enroll, the WLB incentive, the water quality incentive, is not going to be applicable. So we have a question here. If they're only in the WLEB, will they just get a bonus? Just clarifying. They're going to get an additional bonus for new acres. Must be new acres being enrolled, if that makes sense, Lauren. So that's why it's going to be important on that CREP, the MI CREP 3, that you identify by practice and by field, whether it's re-enrolled or it's new enrolled acres. So once again, we're going to run through the same calculations just to show a little bit of difference in the re-enrollment. We still have the same soils. We have the same inflationary 10% being added. We have still the 90% statutory cap being applied, and then the soil productivity index, as well as they're going to earn an additional 43% on their incentives. This is just the example. You're fine, Dale. Once again, they're going to earn the same amount of money for their annual rental payment as they did under the new enrollment. In this instance, once again, we're not going to issue any maintenance or management payments. Federally, we're not, but the state of Michigan is going to. They're also going to pay an enrollment bonus, and that's the $150 an acre. So they're going to get $1,500 for that. And then eventually, when it's triggered, they're going to get a maintenance and management payment of $100 an acre, which is going to come out or equate to $1,000. So payment type, annual rental payments on this, they're going to earn just over $21,000. The enrollment bonus they're going to get from the state is $1,500. And if it's a management, they're also going to get a management maintenance bonus of $1,000. So in this example, it's going to be $24,000, just over $24,000 that they earn over the life of the contract. And once again, we broke this down where it was CREP versus a CCRP, so you could see what those amounts are, what those differences are. And like Dale mentioned, you know, it might be important to participants to know what those financials are between the two programs. Or like he stated, they might not want to go CREP. They might not want to put that wider acreage in or go to those requirements that we have within CREP. So other policy specifications, we just wanted to hit really quick. The contract period for the CRP ones for under CREP, the minimum duration is 14 years and will not exceed 15 years. The 14 years, that has to do with newly enrolled acreage, and it also depends on if there's a crop established on the ground. That's something that FSA determines when we're working with the participant and we're doing the contracting. but re-enrolled acres will always be a 15-year contract because we can't have a gap in contract. Eligible land that's currently enrolled in CRP, this is a policy requirement. We do not begin enrollment no earlier than 6 months prior to the CRP1 expiration. Enrollment for new land for CREP, once we're up and rolling, we can actually do that on a continuous basis. And then right now, as it stands, haying and grazing is not authorized on land that's enrolled under CREP. Even though it's allowed for CRP, our current environmental assessment does not allow for haying and grazing to occur on CREP.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. Appreciate that. So just a few other things we wanted to talk about, and that's next steps. So as we mentioned, you know, we are tentatively looking at April 4th, 2022 being the beginning of our sign up. There's a couple things that have to occur between now and then. They're fairly minor. We're comfortable that we're going to be able to get there, but stand by. Again, acreage and practice availability is on a first come, first served basis. So remember, until we can fully develop our environmental assessment, we have some caps we have to live within on the CP1s, 2s, the 23, 23A, and 26. And 2, as John mentioned the other day, I mean, we're working off initially $4,400,000. And so again, we expect, you know, even with high commodity prices, there's a lot of pent up interest in this, and you folks know that better than us. So we're hoping that if we go through that money quickly, as John indicated, there may be the ability to use some other sources, but eventually we want to demonstrate to the Michigan legislature that this is a good investment, and that if we can make it through this fiscal year, perhaps they will then, and we anticipate hopefully that they will give us some additional monies. And this is just the beginning of the training that we've been talking, right? We want the feedback from you folks. We want you to identify and share your needs with us. You know, Kelly and I and John, we all started in the field, Brian. We think we know what you folks need to hear and what you want to hear, but you know, it's most beneficial if you let us know, are we hitting the mark? What else do you want from us to make you fully comfortable with this effort? So keep informing through the chains of command what your needs are. We want to meet those. The environmental assessment we talked about that Washington staff is working on. Once we get that, we're going to convene our partners together, and it really is going to allow us, one, to address that practice acreage limitation, which is problematic. But again, we're hoping that we can eliminate that shortly, but also to explore additional opportunities. So again, all the partners we're going to bring together once we get that framework and take a look at. And again, that's where the field feedback is going to be essential for us as well. And then one other loose end that we've been thinking about, we haven't defined it yet, is quality assurance, quality control, right? We're going to have to demonstrate that these investments are being you know, true to the policy, true to this agreement. And so we're going to put into place some quality assurance and quality control amongst all the partners. And, you know, we'll further define that. Something Kelly threw on there I thought was kind of cool. You know, hopefully we've given you folks the confidence over the last couple of days to have a better understanding of what this is about. You know, like anything, once you get into it, it's going to make a lot more sense to you folks. So again, we hope that you found these to be beneficial. And with that, I mean, we're a few minutes over. We appreciate the time. I see a question in the chat. These new CRP participants just have to be in the CREP counties, not in a specific watershed. Correct. That's correct. There's 3 specific watersheds. As Kelly indicated, there's a layer that you want to bring into your Terra that will identify who's in, who's out. If they're out, again, we have all these other conservation tools and efforts that we've talked about.
Yeah, it's not a countywide basis. It is actually specific to the watershed, and you do need to use that tool because it could be a portion of a township that's eligible.
Good clarification, Kelly. So again, recognizing we've gone a little bit over, but if you folks have questions that you want to ask direct, either in the chat or, you know, take your mic off mute. You know, we'll entertain a few of those. But again, we recognize, I mean, this is the first of our journey. And so there's going to be much more investment in you folks, particularly if you let us know that there's some things that remain unclear or that become recognized as being needed as you start this journey. We want to know what those are. Our friends at MSU Extension, they're going to assist with a lot of that. They're actually producing some videos on some of the aspects of this that we think you will find helpful as you work with landowners and participants. So just another minute maybe to monitor the chat. Kelly, John, anything else to add?
I think you were pretty thorough here. But you know, keep in mind we did set up those monthly calls specifically like you addressed at the end. We want to hear from folks, you know, what's working, what's not, what do you recommend we could do to help support you. So hopefully you're taking advantage of those calls, and we'll continue to. If you have not gotten the invite for those, please let me or Dale or Kelly know, and we'll make sure to get you on the list.
Thanks, John. And thanks, Kelly and John, for your help the last couple of days. And again, all those that have got us to this point, this has really been a collaborative effort. Now, you know, we're excited to see where this takes us. So again, we're not seeing any hands raised, any additional questions in the chat. We're 6 minutes over. We'll let you folks get back to your day. Again, we've assured you that once we do announce the sign up, the policy will be in place, the software will be in place, the needs and feasibility worksheets and the program sheets will be in place. You folks, our commitment to you is you'll have everything that you need to start out with, and then we'll build from there. So again, thanks again for the attention the last couple of days. Thanks again for everything you folks do for conservation. You're our heroes. Keep it up and keep in touch. And with that, we'll let you get back to your day and talk to you again soon, I'm sure. Take care all.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.